The sun had begun its slow descent, painting the horizon with streaks of orange and crimson. The small town, nestled at the edge of the mountains, bustled with its usual weekend rhythm. Shopkeepers rolled down shutters, the smell of roasted corn and fried dough drifted from food stalls, and families wandered along the sidewalks with shopping bags and children tugging at their hands. In the heart of town, the farmers' market was winding down. Vendors called out last-minute bargains, while mothers bargained for vegetables and children licked the final drips of melting ice cream cones. Above all that everyday chatter came the unmistakable roar of motorcycles. The growl of engines cut through the air like thunder rolling across the sky. Heads turned instinctively. A line of Harleys cruised down the main road, their chrome gleaming in the fading sunlight. At their lead rode Jack Donnelly, though most people didn't call him that. To nearly everyone, he was Bear. He was every inch the image of a Hell's Angel. Tall, broad-shouldered, his beard thick and streaked with gray, tattoos crawling down both arms, and a heavy leather jacket adorned with the infamous patch. Bear carried the aura of someone you didn't want to cross. People stepped aside, some pulling their children closer, while others simply watched with thinly veiled unease. Bear noticed it all, but he had long ago learned to live with the sideways glances. He didn't ride for anyone's approval. The road, the brotherhood, and the machine between his legs, that was his world. Yet, beneath that hard exterior, there was more to him than the image of danger everyone assumed. The bikes slowed as they neared a diner on the edge of town. The crew had made it their stop for the evening, coffee, pie, and a chance to stretch their legs before heading back on the highway. Engines rumbled down to silence one by one as the bikers parked in a row, their boots crunching gravel as they dismounted. Conversations hushed for a moment as the group made their way inside. But Bear didn't follow right away. Something had caught his eye. Across the parking lot, sitting on the curb near the lamppost, was a little girl. She couldn't have been more than 6 years old. Her blonde hair was slightly tangled, her face pink from crying, and in her small arms she clutched a worn stuffed rabbit. Her sneakers were scuffed and untied, and her eyes were wide, darting around as though searching for something, or someone, that wasn't there. Bear paused, his brow furrowing. It was not the sort of sight you expected in the middle of town. He walked toward her slowly, his heavy boots loud against the pavement. The girl's head snapped up at the sound, and for a second, fear flashed across her face. A giant man covered in leather and tattoos was not the kind of stranger children were taught to trust. But then she spoke first, her voice soft, almost breaking. "Mister, I can't find my mommy." Bear crouched down so he was eye level with her. The leather jacket creaked as he moved, his presence still overwhelming but softened by the concern in his gaze. He rested one large hand on his knee and asked gently, "Hey there, darlin'. What's your name?" She sniffled, clutching the rabbit tighter. "Emily." "Well, Emily," Bear said, his voice low but kind, "I'm Bear." "You lost your mom, huh?" Her lips trembled, and she nodded quickly, eyes filling with fresh tears. Bear sighed. He had seen a lot in his life, broken men, angry fights, lost causes, but nothing hit him harder than a scared kid. He extended his hand, palm open. "Don't you worry, we'll get you back to your mama. You trust me." Emily looked at his hand, then at his face. For a moment, she hesitated, but something in his eyes, something steady and reassuring, made her. Small fingers slowly creep into his much larger ones. Behind him, some of the other bikers had noticed. They exchanged puzzled looks, muttering under their breath. A couple smirked, amused at the sight of their burly brother talking to a child, while others just shrugged. But none of them interrupted. They all knew Bear was stubborn, and once he had his mind on something, there was no shifting him. Bear stood, lifting Emily gently up onto the seat of his Harley. The bike dwarfed her, but she sat there with her rabbit clutched to her chest, eyes wide with curiosity and relief. Bear adjusted her so she wouldn't slip, then put his helmet in her lap like it was the most natural thing. "All right, kiddo," he said, "you and Mr. Rabbit are riding with me. We're gonna find your mom." Emily nodded shyly, wiping at her cheeks. "Okay." The scene, however, didn't go unnoticed by the townsfolk. People walking past slowed, watching with surprise. A Hell's Angel biker, someone they usually avoided, was now carefully strapping a little girl onto his motorcycle. Whispers floated through the air. A few folks even pulled out their phones, snapping pictures. Bear didn't care about the stares. He fired up his bike again, the engine roaring to life, and Emily jumped slightly at the sound before settling against him. With one hand steadying her, Bear pulled out of the lot. One by one, the rest of the angels followed, their engines thundering in unison. It was a sight no one in that small town would ever forget. A tough, leather-clad biker leading a pack of motorcycles down Main Street, with a little girl perched safely in front of him, clutching her stuffed rabbit like a treasure. Bear slowed at every corner, calling out to people on the sidewalks, asking if they'd seen a frantic woman looking for a child. He stopped at the market, leaned down to talk to shopkeepers, and asked questions with a seriousness that silenced even those who normally wouldn't give him the time of day. Emily spoke up when she recognized a familiar street, pointing with her tiny hand. The rest of the angels rode behind in formation, their imposing presence now serving as something protective rather than threatening. People moved aside, not out of fear, but out of respect for what was unfolding. Children on the sidewalks pointed, tugging at their parents' sleeves, their eyes wide with wonder at the unlikely pair. Bear, usually indifferent to the opinions of strangers, felt something shift. For the first time in a long while, he wasn't just a biker to these people. He was a guardian, and Emily, sitting small and safe in front of him, trusted him completely. They rode like that through town, the sun dipping lower and the sky deepening into shades of purple, until at last, Emily spotted something up ahead. Her little voice broke through the growl of the engines. "Mommy, I see Mommy," and in that moment, Bear knew they had found her. The roar of the engine slowed as Bear steered the bike toward the open square near the farmer's market. The rest of the angels rumbled behind him, their machines gleaming under the streetlights that had just flickered on. Ahead, standing near a row of market stalls, a woman darted frantically from side to side. Her hair was loose and disheveled, her face pale with panic as she shouted a single name into the crowd over and over. "Emily, Emily." Her voice cracked from exhaustion, but she kept calling, desperation keeping her upright. When Emily heard her, she jolted forward on Bear's bike, her little finger pointing with urgency. "That's her. That's my mommy." Bear eased the bike to the curb and killed the engine. The sudden silence after the rolling thunder made the moment feel frozen in time. Emily scrambled down as Bear carefully helped her off, his large hand steady against her small back. The woman turned at the sound of her daughter's voice. For a split second, disbelief held her still. Then, with a cry that tore through the quiet square, she sprinted forward. Emily dropped her stuffed rabbit and launched into her mother's arms. They collided in a desperate embrace, both clinging as though afraid the other might vanish if they let go. Tears streamed down the mother's face as she buried her nose in her daughter's hair. "Oh my baby, I thought I lost you forever," she whispered, her voice trembling. Emily sobbed, repeating, "Mommy, I was so scared," over and over. Bear stepped back a few paces, his hands settling on his hips as he gave them their moment. His chest felt heavy in a way he couldn't explain, something between relief and a strange, almost forgotten tenderness. He wasn't a father. He'd never had the chance. But watching the reunion before him stirred something deep in the hardened biker's soul. When the mother finally looked up, her eyes red and swollen, she turned them on Bear. At first, she seemed unsure of what to say. Here was a towering man in leather, with patches that carried a reputation most parents warned their children about. And yet, he had been the one to bring her little girl safely back. She swallowed hard, her voice breaking as she said, thank you so much. You don't know what this means to me." Bear shook his head, waving off the gratitude. "No thanks needed, ma'am. Kids don't belong lost and scared. I just did what anyone should have done." But the crowd that had gathered knew it wasn't something just anyone could have done. The sight of Emily perched on the front of Bear's bike, the angels riding in formation behind her, had already become something of a legend before the story even left the square. The market vendors clapped first, their applause cautious at the beginning but soon swelling into something genuine. Then the families nearby joined in, cheering loudly, some even whistling. Strangers who had been wary of the angels just an hour earlier were now smiling, nodding, and recording the moment with their phones. One of the bikers, Snake, elbowed another and muttered with a grin, "Would you look at that? We're celebrities now." Bear just rolled his eyes, though the corner of his mouth twitched upward. He wasn't in it for the praise, but he couldn't deny the warmth that came with it. The mother crouched to pick up Emily's stuffed rabbit, dusting it off before handing it back. Emily clutched it tightly and then turned back to Bear. "Thank you, Mr. Bear," she said softly, her little voice carrying farther than she knew in the hushed crowd. Something about the way she said it, the trust, the simplicity, hit Bear harder than any applause. He crouched down so he was eye level with her, resting a hand gently on her shoulder. "You're welcome, sweetheart. You stay close to your mom now, all right? No more wandering." Emily nodded solemnly, as if promising the world. Then she surprised him by wrapping her tiny arms around his neck in a hug. Bear froze for half a second, then carefully returned the embrace, his huge frame almost swallowing her small one. When she pulled back, she gave him a smile that could have melted the coldest heart. The mother held her daughter close once again, thanking Bear a final time before disappearing into the crowd, guided by relief and love. The bikers stood there a while longer, surrounded by townsfolk who no longer looked at them with suspicion but with admiration. Later that evening, when the angels sat inside the diner over steaming plates of pie and mugs of coffee, people kept coming in just to shake Bear's hand or offer to pay for their meal. The waitress, who usually served them with stiff politeness, now smiled genuinely and slipped an extra slice of apple pie on Bear's plate, on the house. It wasn't just the adults who were moved. Children peeked shyly from behind their parents, whispering to each other about the biker who helped the little girl. Bear caught one boy sketching something on a napkin, and when he passed by their table, the boy handed it to him. It was a simple crayon drawing of a motorcycle with a stick figure man and a small girl on it, both smiling. Bear folded the napkin carefully and tucked it into his jacket. Word spread quickly beyond that night. By morning, local news outlets had picked up the story. "Hell's Angels help lost child find her mom," flashed across headlines, accompanied by photos of the massive biker with the tiny girl sitting on his Harley. On social media, the images went viral, drawing comments from people across the country who were stunned by the unexpected act of kindness. For weeks afterward, whenever Bear rode through town, the usual cold stares were replaced with nods, waves, and even thanks. Parents who once pulled their children aside now encouraged them to wave at the bikers. Some even stopped to chat, asking about the motorcycles or offering baked goods. The angels, unaccustomed to such reception, chuckled about it among themselves, but deep down, even they felt the shift. As for Bear, he didn't seek out the attention. What mattered to him was simpler. A week later, when he was working in his garage, he received an envelope in the mail. Inside was a child's drawing done in marker and glitter glue, Emily's handiwork. It showed a big man with a beard standing beside a little girl holding a rabbit, both smiling under a rainbow. Scrawled at the top in uneven letters were the words, "Thank you, Mr. Bear." Bear pinned the drawing to the wall above his workbench, right next to the photos of his old rides and trophies from bike shows. And every time he glanced at it, he felt something shift in his chest, a reminder that even in a world where people judged you by your jacket or your past, a single act of kindness could warm an entire town's heart. And though he would never say it aloud to his brothers, Bear carried a quiet pride from that day on. Because sometimes, the fiercest guardians came from the unlikeliest of places.